It's really a delight to be here. It was great to have lunch with some of you a little bit ahead of time, and now I'm going to put some slides behind that. I'm going to go through these quickly. I know we have about a half an hour, and if there is any point where there's a question, I'm just going to push some pause buttons in between and just ask questions, and then hopefully there'll be a little time afterwards. So let's see. It says forward. I think I can do it. So the Forum for Youth Investment, as Polly said, is a national nonprofit. We think of ourselves as an action tank. We're really committed to working with leaders at the national, state, and local level to really help them devise and implement strategies to make sure that young people are ready for college, work, and life. The Ready by 21 National Partnership was started about 4 years ago to bring together the partners that either represented the folks who were at the table at the state and local level, or folks that really brought us the kind of technical capacity that we felt communities and states needed as they were trying to work towards solutions. So Gallup is one of our partners, America's Promise is one of our partners, United Way is our signature partner. We have the American Association of School Administrators, so we have schools at the table. Corporate Voices for Working Families is our business partner, and you can see some of the others. But our job was to really figure out how at the national level to bring together the organizations who represent the folks who sit at the table at the state and local level, because we had to figure out if we could do it nationally before we asked you to do it. And it's not easy, so I understand that. Let's just start by talking about three things that we know. And our work at the Forum in developing Ready by 21 and then developing the Ready by 21 partnership as a way to take this work to scale and help more communities was really based on these basic things. Everybody knows that our young people are not doing as well as they could, and some are in real trouble. There's data that shows, and I'll come back and talk to it later on if you want, that only 4 in 10 of our young people are doing well. And we bring in polls like Gallup and other polls. Each one of them gives us a slightly different number, but the point is, if we had to sum it up in a number, less than half of our young people are doing well by any definition of doing well that we can come up with. We also know that a lot of our young people aren't getting all of the supports that they need, and some of them are really struggling. Looking at an America's Promise poll that was done a couple years ago, only 2 out of 5 young people are getting the supports they need. If you remember those 5 promises of a safe place, a caring adult, a healthy start, a marketable skill through education, and a chance to contribute back. When we actually asked young people and their families if they were getting those supports, we found that they weren't, and that the number of young people who weren't getting supports declined by age. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. And we also know that as leaders, we're not being as effective as we could be. We aim to do well, but our efforts don't always add up to get us maximum impact. So if we want to talk about how we have collective impact, we have to figure out how to do a better job to make sure that the individual things that we're doing in our programs, our schools, our initiatives, our task forces are actually adding up. So let me just give you a quick example of that. Anybody in this room has been on a commission or a task force or is running a program, and we think, what are the outcomes that we want to have? And we all pick our favorite one. Let's say it's increasing school readiness. That's terrific. But there's a lot of other ones that somebody else has selected in our community that are the things that they're focusing on moving the needle on. And then we come along and say, if we're going to achieve that goal of increasing school readiness, we have to select a strategy. And then we talk about that and we think about strategy. We say, all right, we're going to expand early childhood education. That's how we're going to increase school readiness. And then we say, all right, how are we going to do that? And we look around the community to find the partners that we want to bring in a room, and we find them and we make an early childhood coalition. That's great. That's exactly how we should get the job done. We should select something that we want to move the needle on that we think is really connected to young people being ready for college, work, and life, ready for the future. We should figure out what the strategy is that we think has the best impact to implement against and move the needle on that, and then we should bring together the partners. But the challenge is, if we do that independently for every single issue, we end up spending a lot of time in meetings going from one room to another. We don't have any way to add up whether the things that we're doing individually really could be more powerful if they were connected together. And so the basic message that I'm going to come back to over and over again is that while we have to focus to get the job done, we have to also figure out ways to make sure that the individual work that we're doing as organizations, as programs, as single-focused initiatives actually add up under some broader umbrellas. All of that for us has led to this pretty simple slide that I'm going to show you sort of repeatedly throughout this couple minutes of slides. that if we are going to move the dial for children and youth, and that means that we have to make not just our favorite indicator move, but all of those indicators move, from reducing low birth weight babies to reducing teen pregnancy to increasing civic volunteerism to increasing college graduation. Whatever your favorite indicator is, we've got to figure out how we make all of those moves in that big gear. Doing that means that we have to move all of those strategies for improving the quality and the quantity and the continuity of supports that young people have where they spend their time. And that means that we have to do a better job as leaders. So as Polly said, it often takes us a long time to move any indicator at the population level. 8, 10, 12 years, we want to, it's great to stand up and say we're going to cut the dropout rate in half, but you don't do that overnight. And so if we just set our sights on that number, we're not going to have the stamina to hang around to see if we move that number. We have to figure out other ways to measure. We think moving the small gear makes the biggest difference, because we can change how we do business as leaders, how we come together in partnerships, how we decide whether we have the capacity to move the strategies that we say we want to implement, how we can join forces and not duplicate efforts. We can figure out how to do that in a couple of years. And if we can increase our horsepower in that gear, we can make the other gears move faster. So let's talk just a little bit about each gear. But before I go into that, does that make sense? Good, lots of nodding heads. All right, so let's talk about this idea of ready youth. How many of our young people are really ready? The challenge that we've had so far when we do things like the Kids Count data book, how many of you are familiar with the Kids Count data book? All right, well, there you have 20 indicators, and you can pick your favorite one. If you really care about prenatal care, you may think our kids are getting better. If you really care about teen pregnancy, you may think they're getting worse. If you care about smoking, whatever. As long as we have a long list of indicators and we each get to pick our favorite one, we don't know whether those all add up to our young people doing better. We need some measurable but more global ways to talk about readiness and to really decide what's important. And we really focus on this idea of ready as opposed to a specific indicator, because if I'm going to determine whether or not you're ready, the first question I have to answer is ready for what, right? I mean, ready for school, ready for college, ready for employment. We have to know whether or not young people are ready. We have to know what the end goal is and agree that the end goal is important. Then we have to actually go to that end goal, whether it's higher education, it's the workforce, it's school if we're looking at early childhood readiness. We have to say, what characteristics do the young people who are successful have? And then we have to go back and measure to see if our young people have them. So when we talk about that, we really need to sort of move from just measuring things that are easily measurable to measuring things that matter as far as young people actually being ready for the future. Now, you're going to hear more about the Gallup data. Here's another of those surveys. Survey was done of over 400 employers, bringing in a range of characteristics from, yes, reading and math content skills, but also whether they had good problem-solving skills, they had good teamwork skills, they had a good work ethic, they had a sense of the future, asking other kinds of skills and competencies, communication skills. They ranked those skills as very important, and when they were then asked, when you look at the high school graduates who are applying for entry-level jobs, how many young people have those skills? They said 4 out of 10 high school graduates showing up were grossly deficient. They couldn't hire them. They didn't have the skills they needed. So again, if we're going to talk about readiness, if we boil readiness down to a high school diploma, we may be missing the mark, because we're graduating young people, handing them a diploma, sending them off to college, sending them off to the workforce, and they're not ready. That's not the fault of the schools. That's the fault of all of us for not taking a big enough definition of what ready is. So this is not about turning around and blaming anybody. This is about challenging the community to put your money where your mouth is. If you want your young people to be ready, we have to work with them to define what ready is, and I'd be happy to talk more about some examples of that. Gallup poll, again, what we found, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 of those young people are hopeful, thriving, and engaged. A small percentage of them are actually ready, in the sense that we know that young people who are hopeful, young people who are engaged, and obviously young people who are thriving are the ones who are going to be most successful in whatever environment they're in, doing whatever thing they need to be doing at that moment to be productive, whether that's learning in high school or middle school or applying themselves in a job. So our argument very simply is that we have to take aim differently to make sure that our young people are ready. We've got to make sure that they're academically and vocationally productive, And I'll underscore there that I think, this is my personal opinion, we don't spend enough time asking questions about whether young people are building vocational skills and getting vocational experiences, not just academic. And we can do that through career and technical education, but we can also do that by recognizing that most young people by 15 or 16 want a part-time job, want a summer job, whether they need it for income or they just want it for the experience. And we don't pay enough attention to work as a developmental place. So we can come back and talk more about that. But we need to make sure they're academically and vocationally productive. Let's say that's at the center of the bullseye. We clearly need to make sure that they're physically and emotionally healthy and safe. And we have lots of data about abuse and substance abuse and child abuse and smoking and delinquency and all of those things. But what we tend to not have data on is in that middle. Are young people socially and civically connected? That's where we tend to not have the data, but what the research tells us is that young people who are connected, young people who have strong social and emotional skills, are less likely to get in trouble, to engage in risky behaviors, and they're more likely to do well academically. So you would think if we were really trying to move the needle on those other two categories, we would invest more time in understanding whether our young people were socially and emotionally connected, whether they were engaged, whether they were hopeful. And you're going to have some data now to be able to look at that and find out that that may be a part of the problem, why we're not moving the needle in the other things that we have more measures on. Did that make sense? All right, I know I'm going fast, so we can get to some discussion. So if we're going to move the needle fully on making sure young people are ready, and again, that definition of ready has to go developmentally from little to big. Don't just wait until high school to ask if they're ready, because that's too late. We then need some way to define ready communities. Again, a little bit more on that data from America's Promise. When we didn't just add up, when we add up community by the amount of activity we have, the number of programs we have, the number of slots we have, we think we're doing a great job. We know we've got dozens of programs and dozens of this and lots of slots available for young people and their families, but they don't necessarily get the things that they need. There was a study done about 2 years ago at the University of Chicago at Chapin Hall looking at what they called multi-need families, families who were already identified as needing 3 or more different services, whether that was child care, counseling, whatever. And what they found was that 40% of those families got no services. So it's one thing for us to say we have the services available. It's another thing for us to actually track to find out if they get them, if they use them consistently, if they were high quality, and if they were the right ones for them. So we have to do a better job of not just assuming that because we put a lot of stuff out there, families and young people are actually getting it. And again, the extent to which young people reported, or their families reported that they were getting what they needed, declined over time. We do a better job in the early years than we do in the teen years. Let's talk about whether young people getting what they need matters. Now, we often talk about getting what they need, and we think programs or we think services. There's a study done a couple of years ago by the National Research Council that defined the things that young people need to have in the places where they spend their time. Things like strong relationships with adults, opportunities to contribute, opportunities to build skill, obviously feeling that they're safe, physically and emotionally safe. Those are the kind of things that young people need to have in addition to basic services wherever they're going to be learning or being engaged. Look at the one relationships. The same study that told us only 4 in 10 young people are really ready as young adults suggested that when they went back and looked at those kind of things, asked young people over time, do you have strong relationships with peers and adults? Do you have a chance to connect and contribute? Are you building skills that you think are valuable? When they asked young people those questions, starting in about the beginning of high school and going through young adulthood, young people who said they had positive relationships with peers and adults and reported that consistently from their high school years into young adulthood were 5 times more likely to leave high school doing well than those who didn't have strong relationships. And that could be with a parent, with a teacher, with a mentor, with a youth worker, with someone in the faith community. They needed that consistent adult relationship, and when they had it, they were 5 times more likely to be doing well. And that's not 5 times more likely to graduate. That was 5 times more likely to graduate with the skills that employers and higher ed folks say are needed to be ready. Right? That's a pretty huge difference. for us as a community, making sure that young people have some consistent adult relationships in their lives. That's the kind of challenge that a community can take on. That's the kind of challenge that would move the numbers on that hopeful and engaged score pretty quickly. And that's not all about the schools doing this. That's really a community assignment. And then those young people who came out of high school doing well were 4 times more likely to be doing well as young adults. That meant that they were either employed or in college, that they were doing well physically, both in terms of emotional and physical health. They weren't engaged in risky behaviors too much, and it meant that they were connected to something bigger than themselves, whether that was civically or through a faith community or whatever. They were connected, they were productive, and they were healthy. So investing in core things that may not be a program, but are some of these core supports that young people need to have that help them be hopeful, that help them be engaged, that make sure they're thriving, has a huge payoff. Does that make sense? So the question is, who can do this? And again, the list, and you could continue this list, the list is far more than just schools, and it's far more than just families. It's any place where young people may find themselves and where they spend time voluntarily and sometimes involuntarily. We've got to make sure that in the environments where young people are spending time, they have a chance to do these things. So let's talk just for a second about why it's so important for us to think beyond school when we think about how we're going to really fill what I call developmental space. Because every young person gets up in the morning, and we see this in 3-year-olds. We forget that it's there in 13-year-olds and 23-year-olds. They get up in the morning looking for people to talk to and places to go and things to do. Right? I mean, imagine a 3-year-old. As soon as they wake up, that's what they're looking for. We want to keep that spark alive all the way through into young adulthood. And what that means is that we've got to now pay attention that we're investing in young people and tracking their progress at least into the 2nd decade. I'd suggest that you track into the mid-20s, but at least let's get to 21 to make sure they're ready. That we're paying attention to them morning to night, not just during the school day and year-round. And that we're asking about their outcomes, not just their academic outcomes, but civic, social, vocational, however you want to define it, broad array of outcomes. That we're recognizing that developmental space is all of those waking hours year-round from birth into young adulthood, and we recognize that school, and even after school, narrowly defined, only fills a portion of that space. When I show this to superintendents, and the Association of School Administrators are a part of us, they love this because they come back and say, "We told you." No? I mean, that box, that school box, is at best a quarter of the developmental space. So you can't tell us that we have to be the ones that are solving this problem. How do we make sure this is really owned by the community? What we then need to talk about is how we really insulate the developmental pipeline from birth to young adulthood, recognizing that school is the main sort of conduit that we put in place for young people, and they sort of enter into that conduit in early childhood often at age 3 or 4 and go right on through into higher education. And obviously a key goal of things like the STRIVE partnership and other things that are going on, P20 councils, is to increase the quality of flow through the pipeline and plug the leaks so that young people aren't falling out of it. But as a community, we also have to make sure that that pipeline is well insulated. And we've got to make sure that that outer layer, they're the basic services, whether that's housing, transportation, health care, financial support. We also then have to make sure that this very rich layer of insulation, which is informal but critically important, is there for young people. Whether those are youth development programs, recreation programs, internships, summer jobs, all of those kinds of things that are in communities that young people use to augment their learning experiences and to try things out practically, those have to be there for young people. And we have to know what they are. We have to know that young people are connected to them. We have to know that they're equitably distributed across our neighborhoods, and we have to know that they're any good. This is really a part of our obligation as a community. We shouldn't leave all of this up to chance. If all we're doing is tracking attendance in school, we're not tracking the kind of supports that young people are getting throughout that whole cube, and we don't have enough data. If we want to talk about data, we then don't have enough data to really know whether our young people are doing well, and if they're not doing well, to know why, because we're not tracking all their connections. Does that one make sense? All right, we're almost done. So if all of that makes sense, then it's clear that we've got to do something different to be ready as leaders. Because if each of us has our heads down, working on one little piece of that pipe, one little part of that insulation, we are not coming together as a community to make sure our young people are getting the developmental experiences they need from little to big, from cradle to career, from birth to adulthood, to be sure that they're ready for college, work, and life. It's that simple. We have to change the way we do business if we're going to make sure that young people are successful. And that means that we have to build broader partnerships. And I put an S there because it's not about everybody getting in one huge room and being one big partnership. We still have to focus on things, but those partnerships have to connect. They have to have some kind of infrastructure behind them, and somebody has to be sort of the virtual lead of all this stuff to make sure that we're doing it. We have to set bigger goals. Each of us can set the goals that we have as a priority. But as a community, we have to set goals that really stretch from early childhood through adulthood, that span academic, social, civic competencies, health competencies, to make sure that we're really measuring everything that's ready. We have to figure out a way to use data better, not to just look backwards, but to look forward and be able to predict what we need to be doing for young people to keep them on path, not waiting until we get data to show us that they fell off path. And we've got to do bolder actions. Our strategies have to get out of pilot mode. We have to start to do things at scale and do things that matter. So the Ready by 21 theory of change simply is, if we're going to make that children and youth care move faster, we have to do a lot more to organize and link and improve the supports that young people have available in their communities. And we only do that by making that little gear turn better, which means we have to do business differently as leaders. How do we make all that happen? I haven't really told you anything that you didn't know. I may have given you a couple new pieces of data, but I haven't told you anything that you didn't know. What we've been doing at the forum and what we've been doing through the Ready by 21 partnership is trying to bring some urgency and some specificity to this work by introducing three things. The first is standards. Polly mentioned the leadership audit. In each of those gears, we have to work with communities, and communities have to work to say, what does good look like? What's our definition of what good looks like for leaders? What do our partnerships look like? What should our goals look like? How will we know if we have the leader capacity? What does good look like for our young people? Do we just want to have academic measures? Are there other key measures of readiness that we want to have in place? And what does good look like in the middle gear? What should we have? Is it too audacious to say that we have a goal that says that 90% of our young people have places to go for 90% of their waking hours that are high quality and afford them an opportunity to build and use a range of skills? Now, you can fill in the percentages, but if we had a goal like that, we would then need to be able to measure it. And we would then need to be able to have improvement plans. But we think the first step towards this is to start to have standards that we as a community can own and measure ourselves against in each of those gears. Then to make sure that we are really driving solutions to move, to improve against the things that we don't score well on. And then finally, that we really need to have opportunities to measure our progress, not just measure the progress of young people, but measure the progress across the three gears. Because that little gear is going to move first, and that's going to give us, knowing that we have moved our partnerships, moved our goals, improved our data using capacity, set bigger action plans and started to implement them, that's going to give us the energy to keep going. That's going to give us early data that says we're building the infrastructure that allows us to move forward. So we talked about leadership capacity gaps. This isn't your data, this is general data, but it's real data. We put together an audit that looked at 14 characteristics under those 4 categories of partners, goals, solution strategies, in data. We asked folks in communities, do you think these are really important things to do? If you don't have this capacity in place, do you think you can get where you're going? On a scale of 1 to 5, folks said, absolutely, these are important things to do. We need integrated data systems. We need strong and connected partnerships. Yes, we need all that stuff. Do you think you have it? No. You can see the gap. We've quantified a leadership gap. Our communities in general are operating on half the horsepower they need to move the next gear. Let's go on and talk about young people. We talked about the Gallup poll. This is from some of their national data. Your data looks the same. The data looks the same across communities. We've got an engagement gap. everybody knows that relationships, engagement are critical to the success of young people, we're going to assume that if we could back that up, that young people, 90% of young people enter kindergarten engaged. It's really hard to find a disengaged kindergartner. But by fifth grade, we're down to, 7 out of 10. And you look at that steady decline. And the only reason those numbers go up in high school is because they get so disengaged they leave. It's not that we somehow started doing something right to turn the curve in high school. That engagement gap is going to cause us to systematically miss any mark that we set for ourselves in any other outcome if we don't fix it. So it's hugely important that you're starting to collect this data. And in that middle gear, we have got to do a better job of measuring participation and quality. And I'm going to underscore that both of them are important. Knowing how well our young people are doing attending school is great, but there's a whole lot of other space in that big cube. And if we don't have any idea of whether they're participating in any kind of constructive learning opportunity outside of the school day, we're missing half the data we need to know. You've heard a lot about summer learning loss. We know that young people, low-income young people in the summer, lose what they learned during the school year because they're not adequately engaged, whereas more affluent young people are going on to actually engage in opportunities that actually increase their skills, so that the low-income kids lose skills and the more affluent kids build skills, because we haven't made a commitment to make sure that we've got sufficient opportunities for learning in school and out of school year-round during the majority of young people's waking hours. So if we're just collecting data on attendance, we're not getting the full explanation about why young people each year, why the achievement gap is getting bigger. And the argument is that more than half of that achievement gap can be explained simply as a time gap, the amount of time young people are spending in learning, in quality learning environments. So quality really does matter in school and out, and we have ways to measure it. And that's one of the things that the Forum is working on, bringing communities consistent ways to measure the quality of their learning environments, to map who's out there in that informal learning space, and to then count how many young people are participating. So to sum all this up, we think you have to move those building blocks to really make sure you've got strong and connected partnerships that are really have set and are moving against big goals. We've got to make sure that you've got that pipeline for young people that fills well, that's high quality, that doesn't have huge gaps in services as young people move from little to big, and that we have really set a definition of readiness that includes not just academic and vocational competence, and not just management of risky behaviors, but the development of those 21st century skills, soft skills, life skills, developmental assets, social skills, whatever you want to call it, that are so critical and that we begin to get at when we're asking people about hope, engagement, and well-being. So we're talking about standards, solutions, success. We've got things that we should be able to measure at the community level about whether we're making progress in those areas, and the measurement part is going to be critical. And I talked a little bit at lunch about some of the work that the Forum is doing to really bring some heavy hitters into this space with us, like SAS, the software analytic company, to really ask the question, can communities have dashboards that allow them to measure and track across these gears? And their answer is yes. If you can tell us who's in charge in the community, we can start to build that data platform and help communities have analytic capacity to know whether, as they're moving those gears, things are getting better, and to know which things are making the gears move fastest. So we need to move the leader gear in order to move the family, school, and community supports gear in order to really change outcomes for young people. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you.